Good evening. I hope everybody's having a nice weekend. Jimmy here in Chicago. We're going to do a story tonight. We're going to talk about two brothers, blood brothers. Both of these men were made members of the Chicago outfit. One brother decided to flip, cooperate, and testify against his older brother in court. Now, think about that. Just imagine your own brother testifying against you in court, knowing that his testimony is going to help send you to jail the rest of your life. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I could never, ever testify, inform, rat on a brother, any of my sisters, certainly not my mom or my dad. No, I never had a brother. I have three wonderful sisters that I love. I used to tease my mom. I would say, little chick. We used to call her Chickie. Little chick, you should have had more sons, meaning less headaches, less drama. But if I did have a brother, there was no way in hell I'd be able to get in court and testify against him. We're going to talk about Nick Calabrese, how he betrayed his older brother, Frank Calabrese. We're going to talk a little bit about their relationships, and then we're going to go into the dozen or so murders that the two of them, along with other outfit guys, participated in. I appreciate everyone that takes time to watch and follow my channel. Please hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. I enjoy all your content. Comments. I'd be getting a lot of good insight and a lot of ideas for some upcoming shows. Some of my followers have sent me personal stories of some of the outfit guys along with photos. So I'm going to share that with you as well. The vast majority of my stories are all about the major mob trials I went to going back to the early 1990s through the mid 2000s. This channel is strictly to entertain and to educate people about the history of the Chicago outfit. I mean, no disrespect to any of the victims, family, friends, any of the defendants, any of the wise guys, associates. If there's any videos you don't like, just let me know. One click of the button and I can delete it. But let's get into it, man. We're going to talk about this guy right here. This man needs no introduction. You got Frank Calabrese, right? Made member of the Chicago outfit, a loyal soldier of the 26th Street crew. Frank Calabrese was the biggest loan shark in the city of Chicago. Now think about that for a little bit. The city of Chicago is the third largest city in the country. And Frank Calabrese was the largest loan shark in the third largest city in the country. Not only did he loan money to people in the city, surrounding suburbs, he expanded his juice operation out west to the Midwest and other parts of the country. A lot of people that I know in my neighborhood, their family and friends, all borrowed money from Frank Calabrese at one time. It came out during one of the trials that pretty much every waiter, bartender, busboy, valet parker, restaurant owner, chef, cook, barback, all the restaurant people that worked in Greektown and in Chinatown either gambled with Frank Calabrese or borrowed money from him. This man made millions of dollars in the loan shark business. Angela Petria gave him money to put on the street, and he turned that money into millions. He admitted that in court. Frank Calabrese admitted that on the stand, and he said that he never used violence. I'll never forget when Frank Calabrese was in court, kind of looked like a retired NFL linebacker. Pretty big guy, massive forearms, massive hands, fingers. For the most part, he was on his best behavior, dressed in a sport jacket that was a little too small for him. You could tell he lost most of his hair. He had glasses on. Pretty big guy, pretty intimidating. I did lock eyes with him a few times. He was probably thinking, who the hell is this guy and what are you staring at? I'll never forget it. Half the time he would be at the defense table, eating candy, sipping on water, coffee, joking with his lawyer, Joe Lopez, and some of Joe Lopez's legal team. But when Junior and Nick testified against him, you can just imagine. Sometimes he would laugh out loud, shake his head. But most of the time, he was trying to intimidate them. Frank Calabrese was glaring them down, staring them down. He was only like, 10, 15 feet away from him. And Frank Calabrese tried to blame all those murders on Nick Calabrese. Frank Calabrese claimed that his son and his brother conspired together to steal all his money and lock him up for life. At times when Frank Calabrese would lose his temper, he would stand up, pound his fist on the table, start yelling, start screaming at the prosecutor, at the judge, and members in the gallows. He even mouthed the word, "You're an effing dead man," to prosecutor Marcus Funk. We're going to talk about how Frank Calabrese brought his brother Nick into the life. As we all know, Nicky did a stint in the Army, was an iron worker, was one of the men that built the John Hancock building, did the iron work there. He wanted to make some more money, so Frank Calabrese slowly but surely schooled him and got him involved into the life. It was just a matter of time before they started committing murders together for the 26th Street crew. Nicky Calabrese testified in court that he controlled the books for Frank's loan sharking operation. And he noticed several times some of the money was light. And he would get real nervous because every once in a while, spontaneously, Angelo LaPetria and his brother Jimmy LaPetria would call Nick, and they would want Nick to meet him, usually somewhere in the neighborhood, to go over the book to make sure that the money was where it's supposed to be. So Nick sometimes had to play with the money to make sure when he gave Angelo and Jimmy his account for the week or the month that it was spot on. Nick Calabrese went on to testify that he believed his brother Frank Calabrese was skimming, was actually stealing money from Angelo LaPetria, and it put him in a bad spot because there was nothing he could really do about it. While Nick is accusing his brother of this, Frank Calabrese is shaking his head, laughing out loud, yelling, "Dem are lies," to Nick. Just imagine. But Nick Calabrese was petrified anytime he got a call from Jimmy or Angelo LaPetria where they wanted to meet him without his brother. Most of that time, it was to go over the numbers. But that's really something because Frank Calabrese had the balls to steal from his boss. Can you imagine what would have happened if Angelo LaPetria found out? Now, what a lot of people didn't know about Frank Calabrese, including his son and his brother, is Frank Calabrese was running a multi-million-dollar gambling operation with Nick Ferriola. Nicky Ferriola, as we all know, is Joe Ferriola, legend in the Chicago outfit. Joe Nagel, boss at one time. That was Nicky's father. Nicky Ferriola was one of the defendants at the Family Secrets trial as well, but he was smart. Rather than blow trial and have to sit next to guys like Frank Calabrese, Joe Lombardo, Jimmy Marcello, which never really looks too good, He listened to his lawyer. He listened to his lawyers. He kept his mouth shut. He didn't have to rat on anybody. He did his time like a man. He had to pay like $9 million in restitution and like a $60,000 fine. Did a couple years in jail, was released to a halfway house, comes home, gets a legitimate job, and now is with his family. He's a family man. His outfit days are long gone. He's learned his lesson. Some people on YouTube are saying he's the upcoming boss of Chicago outfit. That's complete nonsense. But I bring up Nick Ferriola because when he would pose as Frank Calabrese's godson, even though he wasn't, he would go visit Frank Calabrese in prison as a visitor. And at one point, he told Frank Calabrese that the book is bringing in $100,000 cash a week, and his profit is $160,000 a month. So just imagine $100,000 cash every week, and Nicky's profit for his end was $160,000. Frank Calabrese told him in code never to talk about large amounts of money like that in front of anybody. Also, during one of the visits, Frank Calabrese was talking in code to Nick Calabrese, letting him know that his brother or his sister is a snitch that could possibly become an informant. And Frank Calabrese was given his consent to the men outside that it was okay with him if they killed his own brother. Frank Calabrese went on to say, it says in the Bible, if your brother betrays you, it's okay to kill him. Nicky Ferriola was blown away. You can hear him on tape say, wow, meaning he was shocked that according to the Bible, it's okay to kill your brother, according to Frank Calabrese. I first met Nick Ferriola at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So just imagine Nicky Ferriola, right? He's running a gambling book for made member outfit killer Frank Calabrese, a heavyweight, a captain in his crew, and he works here. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange is full of deadbeat gamblers, not deadbeat gamblers, but degenerate gamblers. These guys will bet on every basketball, every baseball, every football, every hockey game. They'll bet on two cockroaches climbing the wall. So just imagine with all his contacts and coworkers and friends and associates, the money he was able to make just with the gambling going on at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Again, $100,000 a week they were pulling in. And as I mentioned before, a lot of Chicago outfits, sons, grandsons, nephews, nieces, family members, and friends all work here. Nick Ferriola, here or the Board of Trade. The late Sally De Laurentiis. Tony Borsellino's kid, Louis Borsellino. Jimmy Marcello's kid. Iupa's kid. The list goes on and on. Back then, a seat in the 90s was like $250,000, somewhere around there. So some of these outfit guys, while they sat in prison, they bought their sons or nephews or relatives seats at the Board of Trade or Mercantile Exchange, and they made millions. Kind of like a tear and a smile, right? But this was a great place to work back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s. Chicago outfit had a lot of influence on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Now here we got Nick Calabrese, right? Made member of Chicago outfit. He testified to 16 unsolved murders. 14 of them he participated in. I think 12 of them he participated in with his brother, right around there. These murders took place back to 1970s. Nick Calabrese was the only made member of the Chicago outfit to ever flip and cooperate, and his testimony crippled what was left of the Chicago outfit. On the stand, he appeared very calm, cool, collective. He was obviously well coached. Some of his answers seemed scripted. On some of the more difficult questions, he had a foggy memory. But in his defense, he was talking about crimes that were committed in the 70s and 80s, speaking on this in 2007. But Nick Calabrese started cooperating early on, in the early 2000s. The indictment came down in 2005, I believe, and then he testified in court right around 2007. But his testimony, he just didn't portray his brother. He talked about how his brother Frank verbally and physically abused him and his nephews Kurt and Junior. He accused Frank Calabrese in participating in about a dozen or so murders. He accused Frank Calabrese of cracking him in the face so hard one day, shattering his cheekbones, he had to get surgery. But it was almost like a personal vendetta with Nick Calabrese. This was his way of paying back Frank Calabrese for all his abuse. But Nicky Calabrese, he also gave the government a who's who of the Chicago outfit, past, present, and future. He gave them information about a dozen or so other unsolved murders. And with his cooperation, government paid for his security, his housing, his meals, his transportation. They spent close to $40,000 for new teeth. He got weekly paychecks. And at the end, with good time served, Judge Zagel gives him 4 years. That was a total slap in the face to some of the victims' families. This coward here, an admitted coward, participates in 14 murders, and the judge only gives him 4 years. Kind of like Sammy Gravano. Sammy Gravano participates in 19 murders, testifies against John Gotti, and gets a few years in prison as well. But Nick Calabrese, without his testimony, there would never have been a family secrets trial. For the most part, I found him credible. He wore either a black or a navy blue jumpsuit with white gym shoes. Sometimes he wore a gray jumpsuit. And he didn't look like an outfoot killer until he opened his mouth. He looked like maybe one of the attorneys or your neighbor. I remember him being very tanned, and I would kind of laugh to myself because he had the nickname Karate Kid. Carlisi gave him that nickname. It came out in trial that Angelo the Bull asked Nick if he knew any karate or any martial arts, and Nick said, well, he had a little training in the Army, but that was about it, just basic training, self-defense. And for some reason, Angelo Petria took that and must have told Sam Carlisi and others that Nicky Calabrese knew karate. So Carlisi, assuming that Nick Calabrese knew karate, started calling him the Karate Kid. Thought that was kind of funny. But Nick Calabrese, even though I found him credible for the most part, if I was on that jury, there's a couple little lies he told, or some an area where he flip-flopped. For example, with Jimmy Marcello. At first, he said it was John Feccarata. At first, he said it was John Feccarata and brother Jimmy LaPetria that picked him up at a Venture parking lot, took him to the house where the Spilotro brothers were murdered. But then after he slept on it, he thought to himself, I better come clean with the agents. So the next day, he told the agents that he lied and that it was Jimmy Marcello. Jimmy Marcello picked him up in a real fancy van, picked up him, Feccarata, and little Jimmy LaPetria, and drove them to the house in Bensonville. According to Nick Calabrese, it was Jimmy Marcello that helped set up the Spilotro brothers. But they didn't really have anything to corroborate that, aside from Michael Marcello's wife and daughter testifying that they recognized Jimmy Marcello's voice many, many years later when Jimmy called to meet him, to meet the guys. What do you guys think? Do you believe Nick Calabrese? Do you find him credible? Some people don't. Now we're going to talk about this man here, Angelo the Bull, Angelo LaPetria. And one thing I learned about going to all these trials is men like this, Joey Aiuppa, Sam Carlisi, they led with fear, with violence. If they even thought you were going to cooperate or talk to a grand jury, or if you broke rules or got out of line or did things you weren't supposed to be doing, without any hesitation, they would have you killed. Then you had other leaders, guys like John No-Nos DeFranzo, where they weren't using violence anymore. They were going legit. But this man here, at times, when he would give out a contract, him and some of the other bosses, they wanted it done yesterday. Like, for example, the original plan of the Splotcher brothers. They were going to kill the Splotcher brothers in Nevada with a couple of grenades and an Uzi, but it was taking a long time. They called that off and went to Plan B. Plan B, as we all know, they lured him to a house in Bensonville. But all that time, the crew was out west. The bosses were getting antsy, meaning Carlisi, Joe Ferriola, Angelo Petria. They were getting antsy. And their MO is, if you can't get it done, we'll give it to another crew and have you taken out. Another particular story where it was taking them a long time to kill Chico Ortiz, right? One time they had him in their sight. They didn't do it. They froze. Angelo Petria said, if you can't do it, I'll do it myself. But that's what kind of man this was. Frank Calabrese claims that he was the only one to ever look Angelo in the eyes. He said he was the only one that never feared him. Jerry Scalise, on the other hand, said nobody liked being around him. They stayed clear away from him at the club. He was talked about quite a bit at the Family Secrets trial, but say what you want about this evil man, he's a stand-up guy who did a lot of heavy work. Angelo Petria made a fortune in the 26th Street crew and also extorted a lot of money from Chinatown. He did some time during Strawman indictment when Joe Lombardo, Joey Upa, Jack Cerrone, and a couple other guys all got pinched from skimming several mobbed-up hotel and casinos. Now we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about some of the murders that Nick Calabrese testified to that him and his brother participated in. There were other murders where Frank Calabrese either wasn't involved or invited, and sometimes he would get a little uneasy wondering why he wasn't invited. But Nick Calabrese always kept in good touch with his brother, whether they did a hit or not. They had code words where one time Nick just got done participating in a hit. He called his brother and said, I'm not feeling too good. I think I'm going to have a bowl of soup. That was code word for so-and-so's killed. We got the job done. But we're going to talk about Nick Calabrese's first murder that he participated in. I'm not sure if this was Frank's first or not. But we're going to talk about the murder of Michael Hambone Albergo. He was one of the 14 victims, one of the 14 murders discussed at the Family Secrets trial. He was killed in 1970. This guy was a 250-pound enforcer for the outfit, a loan shark guy, and a debt collector, associate with the 26th Street crew. But he made the crucial mistake. Hambone said at the club one day, right before he was getting ready to speak to a grand jury, if I'm going away, I'm not going away alone. Obviously, somebody overheard that. It got back to Angelo Petria, and LaPetria gave the green light to Frank Calabrese and his crew to have him killed. Nick Calabrese testified that Frank Calabrese strangled him, slit his throat from ear to ear, and then threw him in a pit line at a construction site right near White Sox Park, right there in Bridgeport, right there in the neighborhood. Nick Calabrese also testified that that day he was wearing dark blue pants and he pissed in his pants. He was so scared. This is the first time he ever participated in a murder. And he was afraid if his brother saw that he soiled himself, that his brother would have killed him right there and probably dumped him right in the lime pit. But because Nick was wearing dark blue pants, his brother Frank Calabrese never knew it. Now, the interesting thing, years later, after Nick cooperated, FBI agents went to this site to try to dig up the body or the bones of Michael Albergo, and they couldn't find anything. So now, if I'm on that jury, I have to question that. Is Nick Calabrese telling the truth about this? That's reasonable doubt. What do you guys think? But that's just one of the murders Frank Calabrese and Nick Calabrese participated in. Now, the second one is Paul Haggerty. They had a code name for this murder. They called this Doobie Doo. I don't know why they called it such a funny name, but they referred to this murder as Doobie Doo. Michael Albergo Hambone's murder, they called that the Pit. Now, here's another victim on the Chicago outfit discussed at the trial was the murder of Paul Haggerty. This took place in 1976, and Nick goes on to say that they had a hard time getting a tail on him. They couldn't really get his pattern down. They eventually found out months, weeks later, that he was actually working at Marshall Fields at night. I guess the guy was a thief burglar during the day, and at night working at Marshall Fields. He would take the train in and out of the loop. But Nick Calabrese testified that Ronnie Jarrett stole a car from Ford City Mall, an old Buick. And I thought that was kind of funny because Ford City is south of Midway Airport near 71st and Cicero. And that was a good mall back in the day. That's where kind of like some of the teenagers used to hang out and go shopping. Now I would not recommend going to Ford City Mall. But Ford City Mall is where Ronnie Jarrett stole the car. They actually named the work car. They brought it back to Ronnie Jarrett's mother-in-law's garage, and they worked on it. They revised it, hyped it up a little bit, and they changed it. They called it Casey. As I mentioned before, they had nicknames for work cars. So they used this work car to snatch Paul Haggerty. They finally got him. He was either going to work or coming home from work. They grabbed him. They got him in the car. He was in the back seat of the car. You had Frank Calabrese and Ronnie Jarrett were in the front seat. I believe Ronnie Jarrett was driving. And then Nick Calabrese testified that Paul Haggerty was literally clawing at the ceiling of the car, trying to get free. They eventually brought him back to a warehouse where Paul Haggerty was bound and gagged with duct tape. And according to Nick Calabrese, the men involved in this particular, the killing of Paul Haggerty, were James Turk Torello. That's the man seen in the Last Supper photo, the fat guy. That's the guy my dad went to the Marine. My dad was in the Marines with, and he was the reason I got interested. But Turk Torello was there. Frank Calabrese was there. Nick Calabrese was there. Goomba was there. Goomba was a beast, like 300 pounds. Ronnie Jarrett, Jimmy LaPetria, and Angelo LaPetria. Now, that's a lot of guys there just to kill one guy. But this kind of shows a pattern because now here's another victim of the Chicago outfit, Henry Cosentino, 52 years old. He was murdered in 1977. They found his decomposing body right there in the west side of Chicago, 4600 block of West Division Street. That's near Division and Cicero, which is a pretty rough area. They found him. He was bound, gagged in an abandoned car, and his head was resting on a box of hamburger patties. The cops thought that was kind of funny. This guy was missing since January 24th, 1977. Had the Calabrese brothers' MO all over it. Ambushed, jumped, caught off guard, strangled with a rope, and had his neck slit as well from ear to ear. We'll keep going with murders, more murders that these two brothers committed. Nick Calabrese testified to why John Mendel was murdered. John Mendel was a master thief, one of the best burglars in the Midwest. As we all know what happened, he decided to break into Tony Ricardo's house and retrieve some of the stolen gems and jewelry from the Livingston heist, the jeweler's heist. Ronnie Jarrett was the one that set up John Mendel because he was a burglar too. You know, these guys stick together. He called them in the ruse of a big score that he needed help with. John Mendel should have known better, but he trusted Ronnie Jarrett. When he met Ronnie Jarrett, he was jumped by Frank Calabrese, Goomba, Nick Calabrese, and others. He was stabbed up, strangled, and this time Frank Calabrese handed Nick Calabrese the knife. Nicky Calabrese testified that Frank Calabrese handed him the knife and said, "You do it." And without any hesitation, Nick Calabrese took that knife and slit John Mendel's throat from ear to ear. When Nick Calabrese admitted that, you could hear a like that in the courtroom. That's real hardcore evidence when an admitted informant tells the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how he slit somebody's throat. He makes it sound like his brother made him do it or he would have been killed, but Nick Calabrese showed no remorse. But John Mendel should have known better than to break into Tony Ricardo's home. Every burglar that participated into the burglary and other burglars who didn't participate into the Ricardo break-in, we all know were all rounded up, brutally tortured, and killed. John Mendel was the leader. He had his throat slit from ear to ear by Nicky Calabrese. It was kind of funny. I was at a barbecue a couple of years ago, the 4th of July, and one of the ladies, the host, you know, she knows that I go to these mob trials, and she told me that she had a crush on John Mendel and how handsome he used to be. And I kind of laughed to myself because I'm thinking, well, this guy's not handsome. And all I could think of when she was saying that was him getting his throat slit by Nicky Calabrese. But it's just kind of funny because a lot of people in the neighborhoods, they actually knew these guys. They hung out with them. But John Mendel, a victim of the Chicago outfit. Now here we'll talk about a murder Frank Calabrese and Nick Calabrese would refer to as strangers in the night. This happened in 1978. These guys, if I remember correctly, they were lured to a restaurant, and now the next murder, code name for murder for the Calabrese brothers, was Strangers in the Night. The reason they called it Strangers in the Night is as these two, Moretti and Reno, the two victims, as they were brutally getting beaten and strangled by a team of outfit guys, Strangers in the Night was playing in the jukebox. So just imagine getting beaten and strangled while a lovely song like Strangers in the Night is on the jukebox. But according to Nick Calabrese, here's another list of several men that were involved in the murder of these two guys. Moretti and Reno, one was a burglar. He was one of the suspects that broke into Tony Ricardo's house. And I think the other guy, the younger guy, was just a friend of his, kind of like Ortiz and the Polak. The innocent guy happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. But according to Nick Calabrese, they talked about they had a party to go to, meaning a murder they were going to participate in. And Nick claims the following men were there: him, his brother Frank Calabrese, Johnny Apes, Joe Ferriola, Butch Petroselli, Tony Borsellino, Goomba, Ronnie Jarrett, Faccarata, and a couple guys. I believe Faccarata was outside with walkie-talkies. Johnny Apes was inside with the walkie-talkies. These men were lured to an associate's restaurant that was closed. When they walked in, Nick Calabrese testified that him and his brother in Goomba jumped the older guy. Nick Calabrese said that he had his construction boot pressing on the side of the guy's head, while Goomba and Frank Calabrese both pulled from an end of the rope, strangling the guy. The other guy was getting the business by Tony Borsellino. Nick Calabrese said that after both of the men were strangled, that Borsellino went into the kitchen, came out with a knife, and the next time he saw Tony Borsellino, it had blood all over the knife. But this is Nick Calabrese's recollection of the hit team that participated in these two burglars, if you will. In Moretti, they really gave him the business. They stabbed him up, tortured him a little bit because he was walking around Rush Street, walking around town, wearing Tony Ricardo's stolen cufflinks. But Moretti and Reno, two victims of the Chicago outfit, brutally tortured, stabbed, strangled, and had their throats slit from ear to ear. But that's a fourth murder where Nick Calabrese testified that several of the outfit guys participated in. So that's kind of showing a pattern. And it kind of sounds crazy that all those men would be there in one place at the same time. But this is Nick Calabrese's testimony. What do you guys think? Do you find him credible? Let me know what you think. But that was the Strangers in the Night murder. I show this photo because you got Frank Sinatra surrounded by, there's that rat, Jimmy the Weasel, Carlo Gambino. There's Big Paul Castellano, probably Tommy Bellotti. A lot of New York wise guys here. We're all good friends with Frank Sinatra. But that's the Strangers in the Night murder. Now, another murder that Frank Calabrese and Nick Calabrese testified to was the murder of Butch Petroselli. Butchie was a made member of Chicago outfit, member of the old Wild Bunch crew. He was killed December 1980. And the first time they were going to kill Butchie, Butchie showed up to the club with a friend of his. So they wanted to kind of kill him alone. They didn't want his friend to get suspicious if he never came back. But I guess Butchie kept pissing off the outfit bosses. And right before he died, Nick Calabrese testified that Butch Petroselli threw a big major Christmas party with hookers and cocaine. And that could have been his demise. He was also trying to outdo Tony Borsellino on Rush Street, going down there every other night with crews of 20, 25 guys, raising all kinds of hell, really pissing off some of the old-time outfit bosses. Some people think that when Harry Allman got pinched and went away, how come Butchie didn't get pinched? Other people think that Butchie was skimming some of Harry's racket money, and that wasn't going to the outfit and Harry. So there's a couple different reasons why Butch Petroselli got killed. Frank Calabrese bragged about how every sit-down he had with Butchie, he won the sit-down. Frank Calabrese hated this man, and I'm sure he took great pride into killing Butch. But according to Nick Calabrese's testimony, Angelo used the word, "go take out the garbage next door," when Butch Petroselli walked next. The second time Butch Petroselli was summoned to the club, this time I think he came with Scarpelli and another Wild Bunch crew member. And Butch Petroselli went to a building next door to the club. When he walked in, he was jumped by Frankie Calabrese, Nick Calabrese, a couple other heavyweights in the 26th Street crew. He was brutally strangled, and Frank Calabrese slit his throat from ear to ear. I'm sure Frank Calabrese took great pride in that because he couldn't stand the man. And Angelo Petria told Scarpelli he's not coming back, meaning Butch Petroselli is going to get killed. If Angelo Petria also said that if Scarpelli or any of the guys got twisted, to flatten them. Like I said before, with a guy like Aupa, Carlisi, during a hit, if anybody froze, if anybody got twisted or balked, they were given the green light to kill him on the spot. That's how vicious some of these guys were. Another brutal murder by the Chicago outfit that the Calabrese brothers participated in was trucking executive Michael Cagnoni. I did a story on this if you want to check it out. He had problems with Joe Ferriola. They couldn't come to terms on some business, so they decided to kill him. They had a hell of a time planning and actually killing Michael Cagnoni. He was a tough guy to tail. They finally decided to use a bomb. At first, the bomb they made wasn't strong enough. Then they went back to the drawing board at Ronnie Jarrett's mother-in-law's garage, made a stronger bomb. The detonator cap went off. It almost blew Frank Calabrese's thumbs off. During cross-examination, when Frankie DeBreeze was on the stand, he showed the ladies and gentlemen, and he was going like this with his thumb, showing them how his thumbs are working perfectly fine, that his brother is lying. And then lastly, they finally got the bomb right. They were about to park the work car with the detonator on the ramp by 294. But this particular day, it was Mrs. Cagnoni and her kid that were in that car. Nick Calabrese testified if she would have got on that ramp, it would have tripped the wire, and her and those kids in the car would have got blown to smithereens. This is the only time Nick Calabrese showed any emotion. He didn't cry, but he got a little water-eyed. I don't know if it was a play for the jury or not, but he seemed sincere. He also said that he was furious with his brother, the fact that they almost killed an innocent woman and a kid. And Frank Calabrese cracked him so hard in the face, shattering a couple of his cheekbones. Nick Calabrese testified months later he had to have surgery on that. But imagine the widow, Mrs. Cagnoni, sitting in court, having to listen to how her husband was brutally killed. Next week later, Michael Cagnoni was in his Mercedes. He exited the ramp. He turned onto the ramp to merge onto 294. Nick Calabrese said he hit the button and it blew up Michael Cagnoni and his Mercedes to smithereens. There was body parts splattered all over the ramp on 294, and they showed several crime scene photos. That's another thing. When they show these crime scene photos on the big screen monitor for the jury to see, it's pretty impressive. Same thing anytime they're talking about a guy. If they're talking about a guy like Ronnie Jarrett, they're showing his mugshot. If they're talking about a guy like Goomba, 350-pound mob enforcer, they're showing his mugshot. If they're talking about Frankie the German, they show his photo. And these photos, these guys all look pretty intimidating. We'll keep going. More murders again. I think Frank Calabrese and Nick Calabrese together did around 12, right or so. I may be off one or two. But Nick Calabrese talked about how they killed Chico Ortiz and Arthur, the Polish guy, the Polak. When John Scully asked Nick Calabrese why was he killed, he said that Chico was selling cocaine out of his bar in Cicero. He was warned repeatedly to stop selling drugs. But the main reason he was killed is Chico killed a good friend of Joe Ferriola, and he never got permission for that hit. So Chico had to go. They had a hell of a time putting a tail on him, casing him. Angelo Lupitria was getting a little impatient, and back in 1983, right around 1983, it was, I believe, Johnny Apes was in a work car driving around in a walkie-talkie. Frank Calabrese was in a work car with a shotgun with his walkie-talkie, and Jimmy DeForti and Nicky Calabrese were armed with shotguns. They got out of the car, and according to Nick Calabrese, Jimmy DeForti froze. So they called it off. They went back to the car. Frank Calabrese was livid. He wanted to know what happened. Nick Calabrese said that he lied to his brother. He said that Poker grabbed his arm. So they immediately, Poker went home. Frank Calabrese, Nick Calabrese immediately went to meet Angelo the Bull late night at a diner, maybe 1:32 in the morning. They told him what happened. They said Angelo Lupitria was livid. He was furious. He was yelling, raising his voice, screaming. He couldn't believe it's taken that long. He said, if you guys can't do it, I'll do it myself. That's what kind of killer Angelo Lupitria was. So fast forward a couple weeks later, they're laying on Ortiz. This time he's with a Polish guy, an innocent guy, a friend. Jimmy DeForti Poker, and Nick Calabrese were a little hesitant. They didn't want to kill an innocent guy. According to Nick, Frank ordered them out of the car at gunpoint. Now, why Nick is testifying to this, Frank Calabrese is laughing, shaking his head, sometimes, yelling out loud. I mean, he wasn't just sitting there taking it. He was just basically trying to make a fool out of Nick, but he was really making a fool out of himself. But the drama to see was amazing. But according to Nick Calabrese, Jimmy DeForti got out of the car, and they both shotgun blasted, killing Chico Ortiz and Arthur the Polak. Nick Calabrese admitted to that. And then after that, Junior, who wore a wire against his father, Frank Calabrese, when they were in prison, pitted his uncle against him and got Frank Calabrese talking about the heavy ammunition that was used to kill Ortiz and the Polak. Like he said, it just tore him apart. So Junior actually tricked his own father, got him to talk about some of the murders that they were charged with. Another murder, probably the last murder that Nick Calabrese participated in, is that of his good friend John Feccarata. As we all know, John Feccarata was a made member of the Chicago outfit. He was actually made before Frank Calabrese, Jimmy Marcello, Tony Zizzo, Nick Calabrese, and others. I did a story on the making ceremony. You guys could check that out, where it was held by Iupa, Tornabini. It was just like in the movies. They had the gun on the table, the knife, they pricked the finger, drawing blood. They had the prayer card burning. But Nick Calabrese, or John Feccarata, was an outfit killer. He was a loyal stand-up guy, never would have ratted, never would have informed. But he fucked up a lot. A lot of the outfit bosses had enough of him. And after the botch burial of the Splatrals, the outfit bosses had enough, and they decided to have him killed. So Angelo the Bull decided to give the job to Frank Calabrese and Nicky Calabrese and Johnny Apes. Johnny Apes was driving around, as usual, in a work car with a walkie-talkie with Frank Calabrese. The ruse was they were going to blow up a dentist's office that owed money. So right near Belmont and Austin neighborhood, Nick Calabrese testified when he went to pick up a fake bomb of flares he made. He pulled out the gun. Feccarata caught the play. He said, "Oh, no, not you." They started struggling over the gun. Nick didn't even realize it, but he accidentally shot himself in the arm. Now Feccarata is running for his life. He knows this is it. Nick Calabrese said the whole time he's thinking if he doesn't catch Feccarata and kill him, they're going to kill him. He finally catches up to John Feccarata. And right before Feccarata goes into the bingo parlor, Nicky Calabrese shoots and kills him. Shot him right in the back of the head. Now Nick is walking away from the crime scene. He wanted to dispose of his gloves. He put them in his back pocket. He immediately dumped the gun in the sewer, and he washed off his hands at an outside faucet. What Nick Calabrese didn't realize, he dropped one of the bloody gloves. Another thing I got to point out, that Junior Calabrese testified that he was the one that retrieved the gun out of the sewer and disposed of it. Now, to me, that directly puts him in the Fecarata murder. He participated in it. Whether you're a lookout like the Indian or Apes, or you actually participate in the crime like Nick or Frank, or whatever your involvement is, if you have anything to do with a murder, you're going to be indicted on that murder. But for whatever reason, Junior wasn't indicted, even though they could have charged him with obstruction of justice because he retrieved the gun out of the sewer and disposed of it. That could have been another reason Junior, aside from wanting to steal all his father's money and keep him locked up, that could have been another motive for Junior Calabrese. Who knows? But anyways, Nick Calabrese at first couldn't find Johnny Apes and his brother. They weren't where they were supposed to be. He eventually found them. He told them what happened, that he was able to kill John Fecarata. They saw his wound. They took him to an underground vet. A veterinarian treated Nick Calabrese's gunshot wound. And then years later, the government x-rayed him, and sure enough, you could see the shattered bones in his forearm. But it was that bloody glove that Nick Calabrese actually left behind. The government held on to that for years. And then when they started investigating into the family secrets trial based on Junior's letter, they swabbed every Chicago mob guy and associate in the country. There was one match to the bloody glove. That was Nick Calabrese. At first, when they confronted him, he had nothing to say. Then they threatened him a second time with the electric chair. That's when Nick Calabrese decided to flip and cooperate. Nick Calabrese didn't just testify and betray his brother, but he brought down Joe Lombardo, who he referred to in court several times as boss of the Grand Avenue. He said that Joe Lombardo was one of the men that killed Danny Seifert, that he heard that from John Fecarata. I mean, that's a dead man. That's hearsay. But that was the last murder that Nick Calabrese participated in, and that was the one that eventually got him caught. Now here they showed some pretty cool prison visits, and even though these guys know they're being recorded, they try to talk in code. Here you got Michael Ricci, crooked Cook County Sheriff, and you got Anthony Chuan Doyle, crooked Cook County cop, both friends of Frank Calabrese and associates of organized crime. Here, these guys are visiting Frank Calabrese. He's talking in code about his sister. His sister is sick. She's a whore. She's whoring around town. She needs to see a psychiatrist. I think she needs shock therapy, maybe a prodder. They're kind of laughing about it. But Frank Calabrese is letting these guys know his brother's an informant, and he wants the guys on the outside of the walls to know that so they can maybe do something about Nick Calabrese. They also talked about they were actually able to smuggle a gun into the jail where Nick Calabrese was. And unfortunately, some jailhouse snitch informant tipped off one of the guards. They found the gun. But Nick Calabrese has no idea how close he came to getting killed. Also, as I talked about prior, you got the babysitter. That's John Ambrose. That was a federal marshal. And Jimmy Marcello and Mikey Marcello were trying to bribe him to find out Nick Calabrese's whereabouts. And the government alleges that the men most dangerous to Nick Calabrese, while he is under the WITSEC protection program, were these two guys here, Mike Large Guy Sarno and Sally Cards. I went to Sarno's trial. I'm hoping he can get out of compassionate release. This man has served enough time. It's time to bring him home to his family. He is no longer a threat to society, and his outfit days are long gone. Another man the government alleges was a big-time threat to Nick Calabrese was Peter DeFranzo, John DeFranzo's younger brother, his right-hand man, his underboss, if you will. Some people feel Pete DeFranzo could have got to Nick Calabrese because of all his contacts. But Peter DeFonso, as you all know, was well protected by his brother John. Another man, allegedly, that would have been a big danger to Nicky Calabrese. One of them, I'd rather not say his name, but another guy is this guy, the late Joe Andriacchi, Joe the Builder. Last but not least, we got Junior. Here's a kid, cokehead, coke dealer, owned a couple businesses, kind of like a rich man's son, had all the money, all the cars, had a pretty good life, definitely did some illegal criminal activities, disposed of the gun in the Fecarata hit. I don't know how this man can live with himself. I mean, I could never, ever testify against my mom or dad. But this scumbag here, he actually testified against his father in court and actually wore a wire on him. I mean, it's one thing to cooperate and testify, but to actually wear a wire and entrap and trick your own father, shame on him. I don't know how the hell he lives with himself. But it was his letter to the government that started the ball rolling. Without his testimony, Nick Calabrese would have never have cooperated. Nick Calabrese would have just did his time in jail. But that's why they call it the family secrets trial, right? You had a brother, a made member of the Chicago outfit, a killer testify against his own brother, another outfit killer, Frank Calabrese. And to make matters worse, you had a nephew testifying against his uncle, and you had Junior testifying against his own father. But Junior Calabrese and Nick Calabrese destroyed what was left of the Chicago outfit. As we all know, there is no more Chicago outfit. All these guys are dead. All these guys are in jail. Whoever's left have all gone legit. Nick Calabrese passed away a couple of years ago. Some people think he's still alive. Hopefully he made amends with the maker. Frank Calabrese, I think, passed away in 2012 on Christmas, his famous holiday. God bless the Calabrese's family, though. You guys like my Chicago mob trial stories, hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Let me show you a couple little shirts I got. These shirts are about $40 each. They help support the channel. Got the Last Supper, Joey the Clown, Alderman Fred Rhodey, Vote for Me and Nobody Gets Hurt, my guy Wings, Sam Carlisi. Now, I was very fortunate because I was going to these major mob trials in the heydays from the early 1990s to the mid-2000s, and there's really not too many mob trials left. There's definitely some street gang trials coming up that are pretty interesting, but nothing like the old mob trials. Next week, if I have time, I might go to Michael Madigan's trial. I think opening statements are Tuesday. He's not a mob guy, but he's definitely a white-collar criminal, probably one of the most powerful men in the state. And like Joey Lombardo said, the only thing the outfit's guilty is gambling. Same with Sally D. It's the aldermen, 50 aldermen. They're the ones that run everything in the city, not the outfit. These are words of the late Joe Lombardo. Now, there was talk that Larry Hoover, alleged leader of the Black Gangster Disciples, that he was going to fly to Chicago from Colorado, ADX, and that he was going to have a hearing in Chicago at the Dirksen Federal Building. I definitely would have went to that. That would have been pretty interesting to see Hoover and how much he's aged over the years. But they're going to do the hearing remotely via web. But I went to Hoover's trial in the early 1990s. I did a story on it. At that time, he was the leader of one of the largest gangs, the Black Gangster Disciples. They took over pretty much the entire housing projects on the south side of Chicago. Government alleged in opening statements they made a $100 million a year drug operation, over 30,000 soldiers, I think. I forget how many murders. But the interesting thing, it was like 6, 7 high-ranking GDs were co-defendants. Guy looked like football players. And then they had one female defendant, Sonia Irvin. But Hoover was running the gang from Vienna, which was a minimum security prison. The government put an ultra-thin transmitter pass and picked up hours and hours of coded conversations. I don't think they'll ever let Harry Hoover out because of all the murders he participated in. But who knows? I don't think he's no longer a threat. I think his gangster days are long over him. But Hoover never flipped. He never cooperated. Guys like Jimmy Marcello, Rocky and Felice, these men did their time like men, never ratted, never rolled. Another trial coming up I might go to. Again, none of these trials compared to the mob trials is El Chapo's son. I thought for sure they were going to try El Chapo in Chicago. But imagine the security at a Larry Hoover and El Chapo trial. A lot of security. But again, it's open to the public. Anybody can go. But unfortunately, Chapo, they tried him in Brooklyn, and now he's at the ADX as well. But El Chapo's son right now is being housed in the MCC. It'll be interesting to see if he cooperates or blows trial. If he does blow trial, I'll attend his trial as well and learn all about the cartel and how important the Chicago was to their distribution, because Chicago is in the Midwest, prime location. And I think the two twins that flipped against El Chapo, they'll probably be called as the government's top witnesses. And then this lowlife here, El Mayo, he's one of the biggest Sinaloa drug cartels. He's locked up in the MCC as well. He'll either flip and cooperate, but more likely go to trial. If he goes to trial, I'll attend that trial as well. But thanks a lot, guys. We've been here an hour. I appreciate it. If you like my Chicago mob trial stories, please hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Let me know if you guys would like some transcripts of some of these trials. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay safe. Ciao.